Play one perfect song and I'll pay $150,000. He had no idea who he challenged. The glass hit the table hard enough to make the couple at the next table flinch. Nobody looked at Marcus Cole the way he wanted them to. That had always been his problem with rooms like this one. He had the money, he had the watch. He had the kind of confidence that came from 30 years of never being told no, and still, in a bar full of ordinary people on an ordinary Friday night, nobody was paying attention to him. That bothered him more than he would ever admit out loud. The bar was called The Lantern. It sat on the corner of a quiet street in Cincinnati, the kind of place that had been there long enough to feel permanent. Dark wood, amber light. A low ceiling that made everything feel closer and warmer than it actually was. The band in the corner had been playing for 2 hours, a trio of men in their 40s cycling through jazz standards with the tired competence of people doing a job they no longer loved. They were fine. They were forgettable. Marcus had decided that within the first 4 minutes of walking in. He had come in with 2 colleagues from his investment firm, men who laughed at his jokes because he signed their paychecks, and a woman named Patricia who worked in acquisitions and had made the mistake of telling Marcus earlier that evening that she thought the band was wonderful. He had looked at her like she had said something embarrassing. She had not said much after that. Marcus drank, he watched. His eyes moved around the room the way they always did, calculating, measuring, searching for leverage. That was what 30 years in finance did to a person. Every room became a negotiation. Every stranger became either an asset or an obstacle. He could not turn it off. He had stopped trying years ago. The band finished a slow number and moved into something quieter, barely above a murmur. A few people at the bar clapped politely. Marcus did not clap. He set down his glass, leaned back in his chair, and made a decision the way he made most of his decisions, fast, without asking anyone, and completely certain he would win. He stood up. He did not tap his glass or clear his throat. He simply stood, and because he was the kind of man who stood like he owned the floor beneath his feet, people noticed. "I want to make an offer," he said, his voice carried without effort, "to anyone in this room." The band stopped playing, not because Marcus had asked them to. They stopped because the room had gone slightly still, and musicians, even tired ones, can feel a shift in the air. Marcus smiled. It was the smile of a man who had done this before in boardrooms and come out ahead every time. "I will pay $150,000 to anyone who can play me one perfect song tonight, right now, in this room." He paused. "One perfect song, that is all I am asking, and I will transfer the money tonight. You can verify it, you can call your bank." "It is real." Someone at the bar laughed, a short, uncertain laugh, not the kind that means something is funny, the kind that buys time while the brain catches up. Marcus reached into his jacket and placed a cashier's check on the table in front of him. He turned it so the room could see the number. Then he sat back down and picked up his glass like he had just ordered dinner and was waiting for it to arrive. The room buzzed, people leaned toward each other. Phones came out. The band exchanged looks that said everything and nothing. The pianist, a stout man named Gary, shook his head slowly and looked at the floor. He knew what he could do, and he knew what he could not, and he was honest enough with himself to know that whatever Marcus Cole meant by perfect, Gary did not have it. Patricia looked at Marcus and said quietly, "What does perfect mean to you?" Marcus shrugged. "I'll know it when I hear it." That was the answer of a man who had decided in advance that no one would qualify. A moving target is easier to defend than a fixed one. He had made offers like this before at dinner parties and charity events, and the result was always the same. People shuffled, people hesitated, people decided the risk was not worth the attempt, and Marcus walked away with his money still in his pocket and a story to tell. He did not see the man in the back of the room. The man was sitting alone at a corner table, far enough from the main crowd that the light did not quite reach him. He had a glass of water in front of him, mostly untouched. He wore a dark jacket over a plain shirt, nothing remarkable, nothing that announced him. He was somewhere in his early 60s, with gray at his temples and the kind of stillness in his face that does not come from peace but from practice. His name was Roland Fitch. He had arrived at the Lantern that evening because his neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Dorothy, had asked him to come. She came every Friday. She liked the band. She thought Roland needed to get out of the house. He had agreed mostly to stop the conversation, the way people agree to things they do not actually want because disagreeing takes more energy than going. He had planned to stay for one drink and leave before 9. He heard Marcus Cole's offer from across the room. He did not react immediately. He sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with something that opens a door you had locked from the inside. His hands were resting on the table, relaxed, ordinary-looking hands, the kind no one would notice. He looked at them for a few seconds. Dorothy leaned over and whispered, "That man is ridiculous." Roland said nothing. Then he pulled his jacket straight, stood up from the table with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who has decided something, and walked through the room toward Marcus Cole's table. People watched him come. He was not an impressive-looking man in the way Marcus Cole was impressive. He did not fill the room with noise or energy. He simply walked, and there was something in the way he moved, measured, unhurried, absolutely certain, that made people stop their conversations without understanding why. He stopped in front of Marcus's table. Marcus looked up at him. Something crossed his face briefly, a small flicker of uncertainty, and then the confidence returned because confidence like his is trained to return quickly. "I will play," Roland said. His voice was even, not loud, not theatrical, the kind of voice that has never needed to be either of those things because the words have always been enough. Marcus looked him over, the plain jacket, the gray temples, the complete absence of anything that said musician. "You play?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Roland said. "What do you play?" Roland looked past him toward the east wall of the bar, where a Steinway Model B grand piano sat against the paneling like something the room had forgotten was there. It had been there for 11 years, according to the owner. It was tuned twice a year out of habit. It was played at Christmas and sometimes at weddings and almost never otherwise. "That," Roland said. Marcus followed his gaze to the piano. Then he looked back at Roland and made the kind of smile that belongs to people who have already written the ending. "All right," he said, "go ahead." Roland nodded once, turned, and walked toward the piano. Dorothy, still at the corner table, pressed her hand to her mouth. She had known Roland for 6 years. She had never, in 6 years, heard him play. But she had found, 3 weeks ago, a photograph tucked into a book she had borrowed from his shelf. A man on a stage, Carnegie Hall printed on the banner behind him. The man in the photograph was younger, but she had recognized the jaw, the posture, the particular stillness of him. She had put the photograph back without saying a word. Now she sat very straight in her chair and watched him cross the room, and she thought, Marcus Cole has no idea what he has just done. Roland sat down at the Steinway bench and adjusted it carefully. He pressed one key, listened to it, pressed it again. He placed both hands flat on the surface of the keys for one moment, not playing, just feeling. Then he closed his eyes. The room was not entirely quiet yet. People were still murmuring, still uncertain whether this was going to be interesting or awkward or both. Then Roland began to play. The first 3 notes landed in the room like stones dropped into still water, and the ripples moved outward, and by the 4th note, every conversation in the lantern had stopped. What he was playing was something most people in that room had never heard before. It was called Ondine, the first movement of a work by the French composer Maurice Ravel, from a collection called Gaspard de la Nuit. It is considered by many classical musicians to be among the most technically demanding piano pieces ever written. There are concert pianists who have spent years preparing for it. There are some who have tried it on stage and walked off shaken. There are others who have decided, after serious consideration, that they will simply never attempt it. Roland played it from memory. He played it the way water moves, not with effort, but with absolute inevitability, each phrase finding the next as though there had never been any other possibility. His hands moved across the keys with a fluency that seemed to belong to a different category of thing than ordinary playing. This was not performance. This was not showing off. This was a man speaking in the only language he had ever been completely fluent in. The room held its breath. Marcus Cole set down his glass. At the bar, a young woman who had been mid-sentence when the music began simply stopped speaking and did not start again. The bartender, a man named Pete who had worked at the Lantern for 9 years and had developed the particular ability of bar workers everywhere to tune out background noise, found that he could not tune this out. He stood with a glass in one hand and a cloth in the other and did not move. The server named Lily, who had been carrying a tray toward table 7, stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the floor and listened, and the people at table 7 did not wave her over because they were listening too. Marcus Cole sat completely still. He did not know Ravel. He did not know Gaspard de la Nuit. He did not know what technically demanding meant in the context of classical piano, and he would not have been able to name the piece if someone had asked him. But he knew, somewhere below the level of knowledge, in the part of a person that simply responds to truth before the mind can label it, that what was happening in this room was extraordinary. He had made the offer expecting silence or fumbling or some earnest amateur effort that he could reject with a kind word and a shake of his head. He had not made it expecting this. His jaw tightened slightly, not from anger, from something closer to recognition, and recognition in a man like Marcus Cole always comes with a cost because it means admitting that the world contains something he did not account for. Roland played on. 4 minutes in, a man near the window lowered his head and looked at the floor, not from sadness, but from the particular weight of being in the presence of something genuinely beautiful. His wife reached over and took his hand without looking at him. 5 minutes in, the kitchen door opened and 3 staff members stood in the frame, drawn out by the silence of the room, which told them something was different. 6 minutes in, Dorothy at her corner table had tears running quietly down her face. She was not a woman who cried easily. She pressed her lips together and let them come. 7 minutes and 14 seconds after Roland Fitch placed his hands on the keys of a forgotten piano in a bar in Cincinnati, he played the final note of Ondine and lifted his hands and set them in his lap. The room was silent. It stayed silent for a breath, and then 2, and then it came apart in applause that was not the polite, reflexive kind, but the kind that rises from people who have been moved and do not know what else to do with it. Roland sat still through it. He did not bow, he did not smile. He turned slowly on the bench and looked across the room at Marcus Cole. "I will take the check," he said. His voice was the same as it had been before, quiet, even certain, the same voice, a different room. Marcus Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the check from the table and held it out. He did not argue, he did not qualify. He did not search for a technicality or suggest that the definition of perfect was subjective after all. He simply held the check across the table with a hand that was, for the first time that evening, not entirely steady. Roland stood, walked over, and took it. He folded it once and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Thank you," he said. He said it the simple way, the way you thank a cashier or a driver, without irony and without triumph. Then he turned and walked back through the room toward Dorothy's table, and the people he passed did not speak to him, but several of them watched him go, the way people watch someone who has just reminded them that the world is larger than they remembered. Dorothy looked up at him when he sat down. Her face was composed again, mostly. Roland picked up his water glass and drank. "You could have told me," she said. He set the glass down. "You never asked." She laughed, a small, tired sound. "Roland." "Dorothy." She shook her head. Outside, through the bar's front window, the city moved the way cities do, indifferent and continuous. Someone across the room was already posting a video. Someone else was searching a name on their phone. The world was beginning to catch up to what had just happened, and it would arrive, as it always does, slightly too late and slightly wrong and full of enthusiasm for the surface of a thing whose depth it had not earned. Roland did not look at his phone. He did not have one with him. He sat with Dorothy in the amber light of the lantern, and the band, after a long and private conversation among themselves, decided not to play for the rest of the night. That was the beginning, but like most moments that look like endings from the outside, it was only the first door. What came through it would take longer to understand. Marcus Cole left the lantern 40 minutes after Roland did. His colleagues had gone quiet in the way that people go quiet when the thing they have been orbiting turns out to be smaller than the thing that entered the room. Patricia said good night without meeting his eyes. The 2 men from the firm shook his hand with the careful cheerfulness of people managing a situation they do not fully understand. Marcus walked to his car alone. He sat in it for a while without starting the engine. The check was gone, $150,000, transferred from a cashier's account he had set up specifically for evenings like this one, evenings where he made offers and won them. He had used that account 4 times in the past 2 years. A poker wager at a charity dinner in Louisville, a golf bet in Naples, a wine tasting challenge in Chicago, a trivia contest at a restaurant in New York that he had organized himself and weighted, quietly, in his own favor. He had never lost. He sat in the dark of his car and thought about Roland Fitch's hands moving across those keys, and he thought about the sound of the room going quiet, and he thought about the check leaving his fingers, and none of it assembled into anything comfortable. He started the engine. He drove home. He did not sleep well. 3 days later, a video appeared online. Someone had filmed Roland's performance on a phone from the side of the room, the angle imperfect, the audio compressed by the device's limitations, and still, even through those limitations, it was evident that something remarkable was happening. You could hear the music, you could see the room. You could see the stillness that had settled over 53 people in the moment between one note and the next. The video was 22 seconds long, because that was when the person filming realized the sound quality on video was not going to capture it and switched to audio recording instead. 22 seconds was enough. By the following morning, it had been viewed 400,000 times. By the end of the week, the number had crossed 11 million. Someone found Roland's name in the caption, someone else searched it, and then the world arrived, slightly late and slightly wrong and full of enthusiasm, exactly as it always does. Roland Fitch had been, between 1987 and 2013, one of the most respected classical pianists working in the world, not the most famous. Not the most marketed, but among musicians and critics and the particular community of people who attend serious concerts in serious halls, his name carried the kind of weight that comes from genuine mastery rather than promotion. He had recorded 11 albums. His recording of Chopin's Complete Nocturnes, released in 1998, was still considered by many to be among the finest versions ever committed to tape. A critic in London had written that it was the only recording of these pieces that sounds like a human being speaking rather than a musician performing. Roland had read that review once and never again. He had performed at Carnegie Hall 4 times, at the Royal Albert Hall twice, at concert venues across Europe and Japan and Australia, in rooms that held thousands of people who had bought tickets months in advance and dressed carefully for the occasion. And then in the spring of 2013, Roland Fitch stopped. He gave no farewell concert. He canceled 3 upcoming engagements with brief professional letters of apology and refunded every ticket. He declined all interviews. He returned to Cincinnati, where he had grown up, and he moved into a small house on a quiet street, and he did not play publicly again. For 11 years. People speculated, as people do when someone disappears without explanation. Some said it was a hand injury. Some said it was a mental breakdown. Some said it was a conflict with a major label. Some said he had simply burned out, that the pressure of performance at that level had finally exceeded what one person could carry. None of them were entirely right. None of them were entirely wrong, either. The truth was more private than any of the theories, and Roland had chosen to keep it that way, and the world, after a while, had moved on to other things. He had been fine with that. He had been more than fine with it. He had been in the particular way of people who have retreated from a life that was consuming them, quietly relieved. He had grown vegetables in a small garden behind his house. He had read. He had cooked. He had walked every morning along the same route through his neighborhood, past the same houses and the same trees, and the sameness of it had felt, for the first year at least, like medicine. He had a neighbor named Dorothy. He had, eventually, something resembling peace. He did not play. He owned a piano, a Yamaha upright that had come with the house, old and slightly out of tune and pushed against the wall of the second bedroom, which he used as a study. Sometimes in the evenings he would sit in that room and look at it. He did not sit close to it. He sat across from it, in the reading chair by the window. He looked at it the way you look at something you have decided not to pick up again, not with anger, not with sadness exactly, but with the careful distance of a person who knows their own limits. He had not touched the keys in 11 years. Until Friday night at the Lantern. The night before Dorothy asked him to come to the bar, Roland had sat in the reading chair and looked at the Yamaha for longer than usual. He did not know why. There was no particular reason. He was not in worse spirits than normal. He had eaten dinner, washed the dishes, made tea, and then gone into the study to read and found himself looking at the piano instead. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, had felt different. Not painful, just present, aware, as though they were reminding him of something. He had gone to bed without reading a single page. The next morning, Dorothy knocked on his door and asked if he would come to the Lantern that evening for an hour. She said she did not like going alone. She said the band was very good. He said he would think about it. By 3 in the afternoon, he had decided to go. He did not examine the decision. Some decisions, if you examine them too closely, collapse before you can act on them. He dressed, walked the 4 blocks to the lantern, and found Dorothy already at her corner table with a glass of white wine and a pleased expression. He had planned to stay for one drink. Then Marcus Cole stood up from his table in the center of the room. And something happened inside Roland Fitch that he would later struggle to describe, even to himself. It was not anger at the arrogance of the offer, though the arrogance was obvious. It was not greed, though the money was real and the need for it was also real. It was something older and less nameable than either of those things. It was the feeling of a locked door swinging open. He stood, he straightened his jacket, he walked through the room. He did not think about 11 years. He did not think about the last concert, or the hospital, or the months after, or the decision he had made quietly and alone in his house in Cincinnati. He did not think about any of it. He thought about the piano against the east wall. He sat down at it, he adjusted the bench. He pressed one key to hear its voice. He placed his hands flat on the keys, not playing, just remembering. And then he played. And the room stopped. And something that had been locked for 11 years opened again, quietly, without ceremony, in a bar in Cincinnati on a Friday night, while a man named Marcus Cole sat 20 feet away and realized, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, that money had brought him to the edge of something it could not cross. What Roland felt during those 7 minutes and 14 seconds was something he would not speak about for a long time. It was not joy exactly. It was not relief exactly. It was the feeling of returning to a room you had left and finding that it had been waiting for you, that the walls were the same and the light was the same and the specific quality of silence before the first note was the same. He had been afraid before he sat down that it would be gone, that 11 years of distance would have taken it from him, that his hands would find the keys and produce only the mechanical memory of something that used to be alive. That was not what happened. What happened was simpler and larger than he had prepared for. The music came as it had always come, not from his hands but through them, from some place he had never been able to locate or explain, and his hands simply followed, the way they had always followed, and the room went quiet, and Roland Fitch was somewhere he had not been in 11 years. He came back to the room at the final note. He sat for a moment. He looked at Marcus Cole. He said what he said. He took what was owed. And then he sat with Dorothy in the amber light, and she cried quietly, and he drank his water, and outside the city moved the way cities move, and the world had no idea yet what it had just missed, the first, and perhaps only live performance of a man who had decided 11 years earlier that he was done with being watched. He had not decided to end that retirement. He had simply heard a number, felt a door swing open, and walked through it. Whether the door stayed open was a question he had not answered yet. By the time the video reached its 5th million views, 3 journalists had knocked on Roland's door. He answered none of them. His phone, an old model he kept charged out of a vague sense of obligation to the concept of having a phone, had received 47 calls from numbers he did not recognize. He silenced it on the morning of the 3rd day and put it in a kitchen drawer. Dorothy came over on Saturday and sat at his kitchen table and said gently that people wanted to know who he was. "They know who I am," Roland said. "They can search it. They want to hear from you." He poured tea, set a cup in front of her. "What would I say?" Dorothy wrapped both hands around the cup. "You could start with why you came back." Roland sat down across from her. He looked at the table for a moment. "I did not come back," he said. "I played one song." Dorothy looked at him steadily. "Roland." He said nothing. She said, "You were shaking before you sat down. I could see it from across the room." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed. The light through the kitchen window was the particular gray of a Cincinnati November morning, flat and honest. "Yes," he said. "And after." He turned the cup in his hands. "After I was not." Dorothy nodded. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. What she understood, and what Roland would take much longer to say in words, was this. For 11 years he had kept himself at a distance from the piano because the piano was connected to a period of his life that had ended in grief, and grief, for people like Roland Fitch, is not something that passes. It is something you negotiate a border with. You decide how close you will stand to it. You decide what you will and will not allow yourself near. The piano had been on the wrong side of the border. But the shaking had stopped. And that was information. Marcus Cole found Roland's recordings online on the Sunday after the lantern. He had not intended to. He had picked up his phone that morning with the vague intention of checking financial news, which was what he did every Sunday morning with his coffee, and instead found himself typing a name into a search box. He found the 1998 Chopin recording. He put on his headphones, which he rarely used. He lay back on the couch in his living room, the large, carefully decorated living room of a man who had paid a significant amount of money for someone else to tell him what beautiful looked like, and he pressed play. He listened to the entire thing. It was nearly 2 hours long. He did not check his phone once during those 2 hours. He did not get up. He lay on the couch in his large, quiet house and listened to a man he had met 3 days ago in a bar play the piano, and somewhere in the third nocturne something happened in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. He could not name it immediately. He tried. The word that came after some time was the word he had been avoiding. Longing. Not for the music specifically, though the music was extraordinary. For the thing the music pointed toward. For the feeling of being completely absorbed in something that had nothing to do with advantage or strategy or outcome. For the experience of existing in a room or a moment or a life and having that existence matter for its own sake rather than for what it produced. He had not felt that in a long time. He was not sure he had ever felt it, really. He had been working toward things for so long that the working had become the point, and he had told himself that the results, the money, the position, the voice that carried across rooms were the reward. Lying on his couch on a Sunday morning listening to Roland Fitch play Chopin, Marcus Cole understood, in the particular way that understanding arrives when you are not looking for it, that he had been wrong about that. He finished the recording. He sat up. He looked at his large, quiet room. He thought about a man in a plain jacket sitting down at a forgotten piano, with shaking hands, playing something almost impossible with complete and devastating ease, and then folding a check once and putting it in his pocket and saying thank you the simple way. Marcus Cole was not a man who changed. People like him were not built for change. They were built for adaptation, which is a different thing, finding new angles, adjusting tactics, maintaining the essential shape of themselves while the surface shifted. But something had moved, somewhere, in a way he could not yet measure. He put down his phone. He picked it up again. He searched for piano lessons, Cincinnati. He stared at the results for a while. He did not call any of the numbers. But he did not close the search either. The music journalist who eventually reached Roland Fitch was named Caroline Webb. She worked for a publication that covered classical music and had been assigned the story 3 weeks after the video went online, when it had accumulated 17 million views and Roland had still not spoken publicly. She did not knock on his door. She sent a handwritten letter. She wrote in 3 paragraphs that she was not interested in the video or Marcus Cole or the money. She was interested in the 11 years. She said she understood if he did not want to discuss it. She said she would understand if he threw the letter away. She included her address at the bottom in case he wanted to write back. She said she had listened to the 1998 Chopin recording when she was 22, during a period of her life that she described only as difficult, and that it had stayed with her for 15 years, and that she had thought, when she read about his retirement, that it was one of the genuine losses of her adult life. Roland read the letter twice. He put it on the kitchen table. He looked at it for 2 days. On the 3rd day he sat down and wrote back, not much, 4 sentences. He said he was not ready to discuss the 11 years, but that he might be willing to meet for coffee in the next few weeks. He said he had been glad the recording had meant something to her. He said thank you in the simple way. He put the letter in the mailbox at the end of his street. Then he went home. He walked through the house. He walked past the study door. He stopped. He opened the door. He stood in the doorway and looked at the Yamaha against the wall, old and slightly out of tune, exactly as it had always been. His hands were at his sides. They were not shaking. He walked to the bench. He sat down. He adjusted it the same way he had adjusted the bench at the lantern, small, deliberate, without ceremony. He placed his hands flat on the keys, not playing, just feeling. The house was very quiet. Then Roland Fitch began to play. Not for 17 million strangers on the internet. Not for Marcus Cole or Caroline Webb or Dorothy or anyone else. Not because a door had swung open in a bar on a Friday night and the world had noticed. For the same reason he had always played, the only reason that had ever been real, the reason that had existed before the concert halls and the reviews and the recordings and the retirement and all 11 years of careful, necessary distance. Because the music was there. Because it had always been there, waiting in his hands, in the particular silence before the first note. Because some things, when they belong to you completely, do not leave. They wait. And when you come back, they are exactly where you left them. He played for an hour and 40 minutes that afternoon. When he stopped, he sat for a while with his hands in his lap. The November light through the study window had shifted to the low, amber quality of late afternoon. The room was warm. The house was quiet. He was not the same person who had sat in the reading chair across from this piano for 11 years. He was not yet sure what he was instead. That was all right, he had time. He had, for the first time in a long time, something worth taking time with. He stood and closed the study door, went to the kitchen and made tea. He had medical bills the size of a second mortgage, and a check for $150,000 that had cleared 2 days ago, and hands that still remembered everything, and a Yamaha upright that was slightly out of tune and needed to be played. He called a tuner the next morning. That was how it started, not with a comeback announcement or an interview or a performance in a hall with 1,000 seats. With a phone call to a piano tuner on a Monday morning in Cincinnati, because the instrument in the study was slightly out of tune and Roland Fitch had decided, quietly and without ceremony, that he was not done after all. Marcus Cole never learned to play the piano. He signed up for lessons and attended 3 of them and then stopped, because the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be was too wide and his patience for that kind of gap, the kind money could not close, was limited. His teacher, a patient woman named Helen who had been teaching for 20 years, told him after the 3rd lesson that he was welcome back whenever he was ready. She did not tell him what she actually thought, which was that he was not looking for music. He was looking for something else, something the music had made him aware of but could not, by itself, provide. He went back to work. He was good at it, he was excellent at it. He ran his firm with the precision and drive that had built it, and the markets moved the way markets move, and the money continued to arrive. But on Sunday mornings, sometimes, he put on his headphones and played the Chopin recording. He never told anyone. He did not need to. Some changes happen quietly in the private rooms of a person's life, and they do not require witnesses or announcements. They simply happen and the person carries them, and the world outside continues without knowing. That is enough. That is, sometimes, exactly enough. Roland played his first public concert in 12 years on a March evening, 8 months after the Lantern. It was not Carnegie Hall. It was a small venue in Cincinnati, a converted church that held 400 people. He had agreed to 1 performance, no recording, no broadcast. The tickets were priced low enough that ordinary people could attend. They sold out in 11 minutes. Dorothy sat in the 3rd row. She arrived early and brought a scarf because she knew the building would be cold. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and waited. Caroline Webb sat 6 rows behind her with a notepad and did not open it once during the performance. The hall was very quiet when Roland walked out. He sat at the Steinway on the stage. He adjusted the bench. He placed his hands flat on the keys for 1 moment. He thought of nothing in particular. He was simply there in that room with those people, with the particular quality of silence that exists in the second before music begins. He played. What he played that night for 400 people in a converted church in Cincinnati was not Ravel. It was not Chopin. It was something he had been writing slowly and without urgency over the past several months, something that did not have a title yet, something that had no name except the one it made when it filled a room. It lasted 31 minutes. When it ended, the hall was silent for a moment that stretched longer than silence usually does, the way certain silences do when a room full of people has been somewhere together and is not quite ready to come back. Then someone began to clap. And then everyone did. Roland sat at the piano and looked at his hands. They were still. He was 63 years old. He had come back from a long way away. He had done it without a press release or a grand gesture or a story that made sense from the outside. He had done it one step at a time, the way people do the things that actually matter, quietly, imperfectly, in the ordinary hours of ordinary days. He stood, he bowed once briefly. He walked off the stage. In the third row, Dorothy pressed her hand to her heart. In the parking lot 20 minutes later, Marcus Cole sat in his car. He had bought a ticket the day they went on sale. He had come alone. He had sat in the back, in the seat farthest from the stage, and listened. He did not go backstage. He did not try to speak to Roland. He had nothing to say that needed saying, and he understood that now. He started the engine. He drove home. On Sunday morning, he put on his headphones. He pressed play. Outside, the city moved the way cities move, indifferent and continuous, and full of people carrying things the world cannot see. And somewhere in Cincinnati, in the study of a small house on a quiet street, a piano that had been silent for 11 years was silent no longer.